Hello and welcome to Shannon Gardens. Thank you guys so much for joining me. So in this week's video, I am focusing on planting my spring blooming bulbs. I'll be doing them mostly in containers, and if I have any left over, I'll put it in the ground, but most of these are going to go in containers. I'll do some with the lasagna method, which you guys may have heard about, where you stack the bulbs on top of each other, and that way you have a longer bloom season for your container. And then I'll be doing single layers as well, and I'll show you guys the variety of bulbs I'm planting and what I'm using to plant with. So with that, let's get to it. All right, so I thought we'd start with the best part first, which is looking at the bulbs that I'm planting this year. So first up, we have freesia, which I'll show you guys right there. Look at how pretty that looks. It's going to look so nice in the springtime. Now this is a bulb that I have not planted before, and I'm very excited to give it a try. This is an early bloomer, and if you guys have had any experience in planting this, please let me know in the comments. I'd be very interested to know what your experience has been. Next, I have crocus, which I have planted before, and this is another early bloomer. So just when things are starting to come up, it's going to be so nice to see these little flowers popping up too. Then I have hyacinth, which I have planted as well, and these are lovely. They're so fragrant. Now I only have 3 bulbs here. I didn't get a lot of hyacinth, but I absolutely love these. These are another early bloomer. And they do say that they are deer and rabbit resistant, so I wanted to make sure to mention that as well. Next up, we have paper whites, which I absolutely love. In my area, which is zone 7B, 8A in Georgia, this is really one of the first things that I see that come up in my containers, and I absolutely love the paper whites. So I've planted these for years, and I had to plant them again this year, so very excited about that. Next up, I have tulips, which again, look at those pretty colors. Now I kind of have a funny story about tulips. I don't believe that I've ever planted tulips before, or if I did, it's been a while. But last year, I must have gotten a tulip mixed in with my daffodil, and it just came up, just one tulip, but it was so pretty that it inspired me to try my hand at tulips this year. So I've got my tulips. We'll see how it goes. I really hope that these come up this year. And then of course I have my daffodils, which that's probably the bulb that I plant the most. So I've got a few different kinds that I wanted to share with y'all. First is the trumpet mix, which I think that's more of your standard mix that you see. They've got a couple of different color variations here, and I got a pretty big bag of the trumpet mix. And I got the replete daffodils. Now these I planted last year, and they were beautiful. They were so frilly and pretty. I absolutely love them. So I had to make sure to get these again this year. That's replete, and I got this, and then I got a little bit of a lighter color here. And then I got the double mix as well. And I don't think I've planted the double mix. So very excited to plant that as well. So that is it as far as the bulbs. Now I do want to show you guys, I have these pansies here, and look how pretty they are, the white and then the bluish purple. And I'll be placing those in at least one of my containers on top of the bulbs that I plant in that container. And really that's more for aesthetic reasons. I like to do that at least with 1 or 2 of my containers that I see pretty continually. I don't like seeing just the flat dirt until the bulbs come through. So I like to have those on top. They last through fall and winter in my area. And so I just like to have some color there on top. And then when the bulbs come through, the pansies or violas just create this nice pretty bed underneath those bulbs as they're blooming. So it's definitely not something that you have to do at all. It's just something that I choose to do in some of my containers. Now, as far as my tools I'm using, I don't really have a lot of tools to use. This is pretty easy, especially because I am planting in containers. So I've got my transplanter here, and what you'll notice is that it has measurements on the blade, and that is particularly good for someone like me who is not so great at guessing how deep something is. The whole eyeball it method sometimes doesn't work for me, and so it's really great for me to have something, especially when you're looking to be more exacting. It really helps me, so I love using this. And then I also have my bulb fertilizer that I'll be using. Now, I don't think that I've used this before. Usually I use bone meal, and I've used that for years in planting my bulbs. However, someone mentioned to me that they use bulb fertilizer and they've had really good luck with it. So I figured that I'd give it a try. And I did see that it had bone meal in it as well. So I figured it's a win-win. So I'm going to use that. Now, another thing that I did want to mention is I already have well-draining soil in my containers, and some of that soil is actually being reused. It's in containers where it was completely replenished probably about 4 or 5 months ago. And so the soil can still be used, and I'm not going to take all that out, at least in some of the containers. Now, because that is soil that I'm reusing, I'm going to add that fertilizer in. If I was using new potting soil in my containers, that already has fertilizer in it, so I probably wouldn't add anything to it at this time. So I wanted to mention that you definitely want your well-draining soil, and you want to make sure that you're using appropriate. That bird has something to say too. I think the bird's joining the conversation. Anyway, so you just want to make sure that you have well-draining soil, that you're using the appropriate soil, whether it's potting soil in your containers, or if you are planting in ground, that soil is well-draining as well. I have red clay soil where I am, so if I were to plant in ground, I would just make sure to amend that, because otherwise it's going to get really boggy and heavy, and that's something that you do not want with your bulbs. You want to make sure that the water is going to drain so that they don't rot. All right, so I think that's it. I'm going to go ahead and start planting these. I will show you guys the lasagna method, and I'll show you a couple of different ways to look at it so that hopefully you can get an idea of what I'm talking about and how I'm stacking those in the pot. All right, you guys, so I have my first container here, and in this container, I'm going to be planting my paper whites, which I have right here, and these are early bloomers in the spring, and then my hyacinths, which are also early bloomers. Now, both of these are fragrant, so I thought that that would be really nice to plant by a door so that I could enjoy that fragrance when they're blooming. And then I will also be planting these pretty pansies. I'll be planting those on top so that this container will have more of a decorative appeal rather than just being dirt sitting there until the bulbs bloom. So there are a couple of things I did want to mention. First is when you're planting your bulb, this is one of the paper white bulbs, you want to make sure to put your pointed side, so this part up, and then this part goes down in the soil, so just like that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that the hyacinths do have a note that they can cause skin irritation, so you'll want to be sure to wear your gloves when you're planting these bulbs as well. And then both of them, the hyacinths have a noted planting depth of 3 to 5 inches on the package, and the paper whites have 3 to 6 inches. So in this particular container, I'm planting them all at the same depth. This is about 5 inches deep, and I'll be planting them all in the same level, and then putting more potting soil on top because I am planting in my containers, so I'm using potting soil, and then I'll put the pansies on top of that. So we'll get to that first, and then we'll move on to the next container. Another thing I did want to point out real quick before I started planting is I wanted to show you guys the hyacinth bulb, which is really pretty. It's very pretty for a bulb. If you consider that this is the daffodil, not so attractive. That is just a really pretty bulb, so I wanted to show that to you guys. I wanted to provide a little bit more information about daffodils. Daffodils do best in full sun, but can grow in part shade as well. There are many different varieties ranging in colors of white, orange, pink, yellow, and bicolor, and include early, mid-season, and late blooming options. All right, you guys, so I'm all finished with this one. Just look at these pretty pansies. It makes the top look so much nicer, and I think these coupled with the paper whites, which will grow tall and have the white blooms, and then the hyacinths, which have that dark fuchsia color, I think it'll look really nice against these pansies and be so pretty in the springtime. So now we're going to move on to the second container, which is going to be our lasagna method. All right, so I'm on to my second container, and in this container I will be planting my tulips, and then the trumpet mix daffodils, and then my crocus, and I'll be doing this in the lasagna method. So I'm going to start with my tulips and then place some potting soil on top, and then do daffodils, potting soil, and then my crocuses. Now, one thing that I did want to mention is they do have on the package where they have the recommended spacing. But particularly when I'm doing containers, I do place them closer together than what's referenced on these packages, because I'm really looking for an impact in my containers and to have a lot of flowers. So I will be placing these pretty close together and then layering them, and I will show you guys exactly how I'm doing that. So first I have my tulip bulbs, which are right here. Again, we're going to do pointy side up, this side on the bottom. So we're just going to place them like this. All right, so I think that's good. And I will place some potting soil on top of here and then start placing my daffodils. One thing that I did want to mention is when you're planting your bulbs, to just kind of check and make sure that they are firm, that they aren't squishy, and that they feel nice and healthy before you plant them. So that's one thing I'm checking for as well, just to make sure that everything feels nice and firm. So next I'm just going to place my daffodils. I honestly place them as close as I want. I do have more daffodils than anything else, so I'm just going to place them really closely together, just making sure that they aren't touching. Okay, so I think that's good, and I'll put some more potting soil on top, and then I will get my crocuses as my last layer. Okay, so now I'm set with my crocuses. Now don't worry about the fact that these are on top of each other, and you may worry that they won't be able to grow through because they are on top of each other. They will navigate their way out, so that is not a concern. They will make their way around each other and grow out from the soil and bloom. So no need to worry about that. And again, we're just doing the pointy side up. Okay, so now I'm just going to put the last layer of potting soil on, and then I'll be done with this container. Now, one thing that I did want to mention that I'll be doing is that I'm covering these with a netting, and that's just to help keep the squirrels and chipmunks out and from digging up my bulbs. I have a lot of squirrels and chipmunks around here, so I'm just going to be placing some netting on the containers where I'm just leaving it with just the soil. And then once I see the greens start popping through from the bulbs, once they start blooming in the springtime, then I'll take this netting off. But I did want to share that with you guys, that that's a way that I keep the squirrels and chipmunks out of my containers. All right, so this is the last bed I have, and this is by far the biggest. This usually holds my herbs in the summertime, but for my wintertime herbs, I actually combine them with my vegetables I planted in last week's video. So I've got this one free, and I'm just going to plant a lot of daffodils, and then I'm also going to put in my freesia as well. So the daffodils will go in first, the freesia will go in last, because it only needs to be planted to a depth of about 2 to 3 inches. And I don't have very many of them. I just have 12 plants, but I'll show you guys that here. This is the freesia, and that will bloom early, and then the daffodils will bloom after. I've got my 2 bags of the replete daffodil, which are just absolutely gorgeous. I've got the remainder of my trumpet daffodils, and then I also have the double mix here. So I'm just going to go ahead and get those planted, and then I'll be finished up. All right, you guys, so I know this is super impressive to look at with just dirt here, but I just wanted to show you that I did finish up. I topped off with my potting soil and then laid my netting to help keep out the squirrels and the chipmunks. Okay, so I wanted to share with you guys a little shoebox I put together in hopes that it would give a better visual of how that lasagna method looks. So let's pretend this shoebox is my container, and this is the bottom of the container. So I may have some rock here at the bottom that helps with drainage, and then I've got soil. Now in my container, I'm using tulips, daffodils, and crocuses. So I've got my tulips planted first, and those will bloom last. So I've got those planted the deepest, and then I've got daffodils, I've got soil in between, then I've got daffodils next, and then I've got soil in between again, and then I have my crocuses. Now the crocuses will bloom the earliest, and then daffodils, and then my tulips. Now I correspond this with bloom time and the depths to which these bulbs are recommended to be planted, and you can find all that information On the back of your cards, when you buy bulbs, they generally come with all the information that you need as far as light and spacing and depth, how big they get, bloom time, when you need to plant them. So they really kind of have all that information laid out for you, and you can just make your decision from there. Now, another thing that I did want to point out is that I've got the pointy part pointed up and then the other part pointed down. So when you're planting your bulbs, you just want to make sure that the pointy part is going up. You can really see that here with this one because it's nice and bright. That pointy part is up. And then I'll show you a close-up. This is another daffodil bulb. And again, this is the part that's going to go down, this part here. This part is going to be planted up. Anyway, so I hope that that's helpful in showing you guys this view of the lasagna method. And oh, one other thing that I did want to mention as well is not to worry about them being stacked on top of each other where one is directly above the other. They are going to find their way out. They are going to navigate themselves around the other bulbs and through the soil. So you don't have to worry about that because they will navigate their way through that potting soil and around the other bulbs. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I'm so excited to get those spring bulbs planted and can't wait to see them in the spring. And I've got another thing that's checked off my October checklist. Now, speaking of checklist, if that's something that you're interested in and you want to kind of get an idea of what I'll be doing in the month of October, I have linked here last week's video, which kind of gives an October timeline and checklist of things that I'll be doing in case you're interested in learning more. So thank you guys so much again. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so that you can be notified each time I upload a new video. All right, you guys, until next time, happy gardening and goodbye.